everyone. Welcome to the Future of Desktop Infrastructure Summit. This online event was organized by the hardworking editorial staff at Virtualization and Cloud Review, an 1105 media publication, and it is sponsored by enterprise cloud platform provider Nutanix. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of Application Development Trends, another 1105 publication, and I'll be your host for the first of 3 sessions today. But before we get started, I need to go over a couple of housekeeping details. Each of today's sessions is being recorded. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording within the next few days. Each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur to you throughout the summit. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Our sponsor, Nutanix, has provided some resources that you should definitely check out. They're on the right-hand side of your console. They are downloadable. Many thanks to Nutanix for making this event possible. And last but certainly not least, we are giving away a GoPro Hero 9 action camera during this event. 5K video, 20 megapixel photos. You can, the list of specs is long. But you have to be, there is one sort of caveat, you have to be present to win. So stick with us for some awesome content from the best independent experts and a chance to win an awesome camera. Now let's get started with our first session, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the rush to remote work. For this session, we have called upon writer and analyst Tom Fenton. Tom has been working with IT and virtualization for more than 2 decades. He has held staff and senior level positions with VMware, IBM, ControlUp, among others, and he ran the validation lab for Tanaha Group. Tom wrote the first training course for Horizon, VMware's virtual desktop product, and he is a frequent contributor to Virtualization and Cloud Review and StorageReview.com. Needless to say, we're in for an informative session. Take it away, Tom.
Hey, thanks, John. And I will be taking you through the first part of the summit. So last year, we really saw this heroic effort to enable our employees to work remotely. You know, we've faced an unprecedented obstacles when dealing with this. I think this is the largest workplace migration the world has ever seen. In 2 weeks, literally, we went from working at the office to working remotely from our homes. And now we're starting to see an end of this relocation of workers. We're starting to go back to, or offices are starting to open back up, and we're kind of debating the merits of returning to the workplace, or if we should adopt a more laissez-faire attitude to allow our workers to work from anywhere that's really conducive to their getting their job done. This was really a neat opportunity because I was able to reach out to my friends in the industry to get their insights and go over what they have learned over the past year and a half. The good, the bad, and of course the ugly. Everyone likes the ugly part of enabling workers to work remotely. You can learn what mistakes they made, so maybe you can avoid them, and also what companies did right, so you can implement them as best practices. Before we get started, I do want to say that I've been involved with remote working technologies for the past 15 years, and every year that I've heard that next year is going to be the year of VDI, and I'm pretty sure that now we can say that last year was the year of VDI. So let's find out what we learned during this last year. This is a fairly short session, be about 40-45 minutes. I'll leave a few minutes for Q&A at the end of it. I do encourage you to ask questions in the chat box there. I'll be able to answer some of those in real times. I might have to delay to an appropriate time in the presentation, or just the end of the session. Also, because this is such a short session, I'm going to make some gross simplifications and do some hand waving when I talk about technologies. So please forgive me of that. And we can get into details if you want to, but it's kind of a higher level overview. So first, I'm going to talk about what we did right and how we transitioned from a remote workforce and how we overcame the obstacles during the transition. Some really good news here is, we adapted, we overcame, we had fantastic remote worker response. People worked from home, they liked it. And it's really, truly what we've accomplished in the last 18 months. Not only did we transition from working from offices to remote work, I think the more interesting thing that we did is we validated that many employees could work remotely. I thought it was going to take another 3, 4, 5, maybe 7 years to validate that a large portion of the workplace, the workers in the workplace could work remotely. But really over the last year and a half, we've proven that it can be done. And people are liking it a lot. Anywhere you looked, you'd have people saying, white-collar employees, they're not really willing to go back to the corporate office full-time. Even if a company starts suggesting that they have to go back, people are saying, I'm going to look for another job. So companies are starting to embrace this remote work technology that we have. Allstate, the insurance company, went through, evaluated things, and decided that 75% of their roles could be performed remotely. Another 24% could be done on a hybrid basis, and really only a few percent needed to be in the office full time. So from my point of view, this is fantastic. I looked at this survey by Owl Labs. I personally have been working home for the last 15 years or so. It used to take me 45 minutes to drive from the community that I wanted to live in to the place that I needed to work from. It took an hour, sometimes 2 hours to get back to where I wanted to live. It was kind of maddening to think of all the time and fuel I wasted going into my place of work. Once I started working remotely, I found I had more time to do what I wanted to do. And over the past year, other people have caught on to this, and we've really seen this seismic shift on the attitude of remote work and remote workers. One of the interesting things I found from this Owl Lab survey is that 3/4 of the respondents were able to work from home, and they now expect to be able to continue to do so. And again, if corporations want to keep their workers they have or attract new talent, they really need to accommodate remote working. So what we as an industry need to do is enable them to be as productive as possible while working remotely. And the good news is it looks like corporations are embracing this, and they're going to do what it takes to make it happen. Another survey, this is by the Pew Research Group, found that only 12 to 15% of the people said no, they didn't really have the technology that they need to work from home. There was another report I read is in SFGate, and it found this one company that had a facility that it's based in Silicon Valley. It had about 5,000 employees. They opened up the campus again, and this is a beautiful campus. It's state of the art. It's new. It's fresh. It has a gym. It has ping pong tables. It's one I've been to before, and it's really an attractive campus. And so they opened up the doors. I think this was about a month ago, and only 2% of the employees came back to work. They just didn't want to go back work from the office, at least immediately. So yes, I guess the whole point of these past couple slides is that people want to work remotely, and they will continue to do so. So how did we do this? How did we enable people to work remotely? And I'm going to start getting into the technology of things and how we made it happen. Many companies during this migration found the easiest and quickest and cheapest way was just to have remote workers just send them home with their laptops. And in some situations, that worked out just fine as long as they were able to accomplish their task with the limited tools available to them. The biggest drawback I heard was the security and manageability. Although we don't see it as much as we used to, we still hear stories about classified or sensitive information being released to the public because the laptop was stolen or left at a coffee shop. The manageability portion, unless you have really strict policies and automated tools to enforce them, the stay-at-home PCs, they can get outdated, they aren't properly patched. And it can lead to security and other issues. When they were in the office, it was a lot easier to keep up on them. Maintenance and routine backups are overlooked. when they're at home rather than when they're at the office. And if a drive goes bad or a laptop is lost or stolen, or gets infected with ransomware, yeah, I mean, you have a lot at stake there. And so unlike the technologies that we're going to be talking next, a slide or two, is the power and flexibility of PC is also static. You're stuck with the hardware that you want. If you need to get a GPU in a laptop or a workstation to have at home, it really is a hassle. Whereas if you're using a virtual machine, you can do that pretty much with just a single click. Also, kind of in the strictest sense, if each employee is using their own laptop, collaboration is kind of hampered as files and information can't be easily exchanged using a shared window folder if everyone's working at home. There's some solutions to this. For example, file sharing, there's things like Dropbox, Google Drive, or they're hosted on the public cloud. They're easy to connect to, and they appear as an extension to your local file system. However, these can get kind of costly. I went out to Dropbox and I saw that storage was about $20 a month for 2 terabytes or $240 a year. Whereas I went and looked and saw that a 3 terabyte hard drive is under $150. And so other things we have to worry about are applications. Do have things like Office 365 and G Suite. They're probably two most popular cloud delivered applications. So you can work with files using local app or the browser delivered apps using Office 365 and G Suite. And using these gets rid of a lot of the hassle involved in making sure employees are running the latest version of the software. These suites are actually priced pretty competitively with the locally run apps. However, you're still limited with a limited set of application. The security of the endpoint, that's always a big driver. And that's why a lot of companies implemented or expanded remote desktop and applications. And so the remainder of this presentation, I'll be looking at remote desktops, remote applications. So if your company is still refining their remote work technologies, I'm going to share the benefits of remote working. For those that have already implemented it, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks and discuss some best practices so you can do it more efficiently and be more productive with your user. So let's go ahead and take a look at the different kinds of remote desktops applications. One of the companies I talked to is when they needed to do this migration, they did something which is one of the older remote desktop technologies out there, again, hosted desktop infrastructure. Basically what you're doing is running an RDP client and RDP server and connecting over network. Companies who did this, they were able to do it without incurring really any additional hardware and a minimal investment in time by enabling the RDP on the server or desktop and then using a client from the person's remote location to access it from another system. So in theory, you could have all the desktop and workstations sitting in the office and send the employees home and have them access them remotely. The reality is it's a little bit more complicated. You could implement this easily on, maybe a dozen systems or so. But for a large-scale deployment, and a lot of planning and preparation would take place. The people I talked to, they only used HDI Direct in this mode for, just a couple dozen systems at the most. I didn't hear anyone actually doing it with, hundreds or thousands of servers. The cost was kind of the cost and the quickness of it was kind of the driving factor, because the cost is really close to null if the home user uses their home computer to access their system. And that worked out fine for task workers, employees that only needed to access one or two applications. But power users, CAD/CAM people, engineers, media and entertainment people, they'd need, a couple large monitors and a graphic card to really get the the power that they needed. And also, as each worker is assigned to kind of tied to a single physical system, they really lack the flexibility to access more resources, whether it be drive space, RAM, GPU if needed. The security and manageability of the remote system is handled by the local IT staff that were still located in the data center, where the home system is responsibility of the end user. I heard stories about end users pushing back about some of the software that the corporation wanted to put on those personal devices of people. The corporation wanted real intrusive AV software running on personal systems, and people just didn't like that. But it worked for some people. A better solution is a brokered connection. And what broker connection does is it gets around the problem of a one-to-one relationship between a user and a particular remote desktop. You have a connection server or a broker that provides manageability capabilities, such as authenticating the user, entitle users to specific desktops or pools of desktops. It does some management of the remote desktop and applications, establishes a secure connection between the user and the remote desktop. Basically, what a user does is they log on to the connection server, and then they're attached to a free remote desktop that fits their needs. And by doing this, you get around the cost prohibitions of having a single user tied to a single remote machine and the inflexibility of having a single hardware profile. Broker can introduce different hardware profiles into an HDI mix. A brokered HDI is easier to set up for large-scale scale deployments than having individual ones. As the physical system, you install the agent on it, it'll identify itself. You don't need to keep track of IP addresses or what system the user are entitled to. You will have to purchase the brokering software, the VDI solution, but this can be offset by a decrease in management. And you can have different shift workers access the systems, and a user isn't kind of tied to a single system. So one of the realities is no one really buys a desktop. What they want to do is they want to run applications. They don't need the full desktop. They just want to run applications. The OS, everything else is just a means to the applications. And again, I heard a lot of people, and I'm seeing a revival in the application-centric computing rather than a desktop-centric workplaces. Application hosting delivers an application to the end user, not the full desktops. These applications don't need to be displayed on a traditional PC, a tablet, other mobile device. It can run these applications just fine. And as the applications and the data that they use are stored in the data center, they're considerably more secure and manageable. And unlike Office 365 and Google Docs, you can add new applications as needed. You can patch the applications when you want to rather than someone else wants to. And so I saw this huge push to application hosting, hosted applications during the last year and a half. That said, when most people think of remote computing and VDI, they think of delivering a full virtual desktop rather than a physical system or like we do with HDI, or an application to the end user. In this case, the end user is presented with the same desktop experience they had with the local or physical system that they had in the workplace. The same applications can be delivered without worrying if they will behave correctly. One of the problems with hosted applications is a lot of applications were designed for single users, and they might not handle or be tested with multiple users at the same time accessing the same application. And one of the neat things about VDI virtual desktop infrastructure, no matter what you have, is that if you're using virtual desktops, they can be spun up in seconds. The speed of deployment was critical with the migration of remote workforces. But it did have some challenges regarding deploying VDI at the beginning of this migration. And one of those was being able to get the hardware on-premise quickly enough during the migration. Heard repeatedly that people, they wanted to add another, 1,000 VDI users to their environment, and they called up their hardware vendor, and the backlogs really got quite long on that because everyone else was trying to do it too. So that was one of the interesting challenges that we had. One way people got around this was going from the on-premise hardware solution to using desktops that were hosted in the cloud. So where before I was talking about the virtual desktops, applications, physical servers being hosted in a data center or a office with DAS, they're hosted in the public cloud. So people were able to get away from having to acquire new hardware. Let's kind of compare and contrast VDI and desktop as a service considerations, DAS considerations. Which one should you go to if you do have the time and you can choose between the two of them? Geographically, where's the solution hosted? If you have users around the world, but your solution is hosted in the U.S. only, maybe at your data center in a VDI implementation, latency can get to be a problem. Whereas a DAS solution, they usually have multiple public clouds spread throughout the world, so you can get one that's actually closer to the end consumer of it. Performance, you need to make sure that your DAS solution meets the performance requirements of all users, including those using demanding applications to leverage things like GPUs. With on-premise, you already knew what kind of hardware you had and what your users needed. Scalability, how long would it take to onboard users? This became a problem with trying to acquire the hardware to scale it out quickly. If you have hundreds or thousands of users that you need to convert from their standard physical workstation to a VDI solution, DAS is definitely a lot quicker to do that because they have the capacity already for the most part. Elasticity, that was another interesting thing that people talked about. In some corporations, they actually have fluctuating workers where they need a bunch of workers, say around Christmas time. And if you have to go out there and buy the hardware to do it, for only having people to use it, 2-3 months a year, then that's not a very good use of your resources. Security and compliance is another issue that you need to look at. Some industries have very strict regulations that make sure that you have to meet certain compliance guidance. Some DAS solutions provide that. Others don't hit all those regulatory requirements. So you need to make sure that your DAS solution is in compliance with all those. With VDI, you might have a little bit more control. On-premise VDI, you might have a little bit more control of that. Data location, where does the data reside? This is a critical issue, not only from a simplicity standpoint, but also that you meet the government regulations. The European Union has very strict guidance of where that data lives. You need to make sure that these desktops, these resources can be accessed from a wide variety of sources, whether it be the web browser. You can get some virtual desktops that you can use a web browser to access. Others, you need to use a thin client or a native client, and we'll talk about those in just a little bit later. One of the other problems with DAS is a lock-in. All the major DAS providers, all the public cloud providers, they have some really neat advantages, but these advantages can also lock you into their solution, their cloud. And so that ties into the next one, which is cost. prices wide vary and they change frequently. You can do long-term contracts, but you really need to take a look at the cost structure of what the DAS provider is offering. Some DAS providers, bill by the second, which is great if you can power those machines off. You can actually save money by powering virtual desktops off. The good news is, when choosing between VDI and DAS, is that most and a lot of VDI providers, they offer a hybrid solution where a user can use on-premise or cloud-based DAS desktops. So companies can quickly deploy additional desktops without having to go through getting new hardware in the data center. It's actually probably a little bit easier to implement and administrate a DAS implementation than a VDI, because you have someone else running all the infrastructure, doing all the management of it. You can deploy them quickly on a DAS. Just add them to an Active Directory, give them your credit card number, and the new desktops will be spun up quickly. However, VDI might be cheaper in the long run. DAS is going to have a lower CapEx. It's all OpEx, operational expenses. But VDI might be cheaper in the long run, depending on the deployments. DAS definitely has a lower upfront cost due to the no CapEx, but the DAS deployments really depend on the licensing subscription model that they have. With VDI, you're going to be able to hit all those regulatory requirements that you have. VDI provides greater control over the virtual desktops that you have and the underlying hosting hardware that you have. VDI also enables greater control over issues, performance. You can add those GPUs if you need them, and you can, add additional hardware memory if you need them. So I really like this hybrid model. I think it's one of the things we did right during the migration, is we were able to extend people's capability by using a mixture of their on-premise VDI as well as the newer cloud-based VDI. With that said, what could the bad be? What's making us upset? With the majority of people wanting to work remotely, we have the technologies to let them work remotely. What kind of challenges did we hear? And I did actually hear quite a few challenges, but I also heard a lot of really neat solutions to those challenges. Went to the Pew Research Center. They went and they found that about 80% of those that worked remotely said they used video conferencing services like Teams, Zoom, WebEx, and 60% of those used them often. So why did these extremely useful applications make my bad list? Because when being used with virtual desktops, these applications can be very CPU and network intensive. And the CPU usage can lower the number of virtual desktops that a host can support. And so that's going to lower your guest density, how many virtual machines you can have on a host. And so the price of each virtual desktop is going to actually increase. So let's take a look and see what happens when you do use, for example, Zoom with a virtual desktop. User one, he's on his device here. He has his virtual desktop. It's displaying the Zoom session. However, the actual processing is being done by the hypervisor, and the network is just passing over the pixels to the virtual desktop. It's not really doing any of the processing. The Zoom process uses the physical server's network to go ahead and connect to the other end of the Zoom conference. And if it's another virtual desktop, it's going to take up that Zoom process as well. And then it's going to ship the pixel across to whatever the device that the other Zoom person is using. So, that's the bad. The good news is people realized this was a problem, and they came up with something called multimedia redirection, or MMR. And it uses the excess CPU capacity of the VDI client to run that particular application, the Zoom process. So the Zoom process is running on the VDI device itself, takes the process off of the virtual desktop, removes the burden from that hypervisor so you can get greater guest density, and allows less hosts in the data center, and each host can accommodate more virtual desktops. It also decreases the network requirement because it actually uses the NIC in the VDI device itself to route the traffic to wherever the end point of the Zoom connection is. So it was a cool way that we could do that. Processors now are so powerful and so cost efficient that we do have excess capacity on a lot of VDI devices. I wanted to prove this to myself, so I ran a process monitoring tool at the top on a VDI device while Zoom was being redirected, and found that during a portion of the Zoom meeting that had a lot of audio and video activity, you can see in the lower thing here that it was actually using 50% of a CPU core. So I was able to transfer that CPU usage from the hypervisor to my local machine. So what else went bad here? What else was ugly? Monitors. In the past, running dual monitors from a VDI client, it was considered exotic, but over the last 5 years, most workers have come to expect dual monitors, and with today's hardware and software, most, if not all, VDI clients support dual monitors. I've even seen them with dual 4K monitors. I've even seen them with up to 6 monitors. The 6 monitor setups are being used by financial institutions. I've seen trading desks where they literally have 6, 7, 8 monitors on their desk just to keep track of things. Another thing people have come to expect is device connectivity. They want to connect other devices to their VDI clients, printers, scanners. Modern VDI hardware handles this without any issues whatsoever. One of the neat things is that you can set policies to prevent the use of certain USB devices, maybe for security reasons. You don't want people to connect large capacity storage devices to their VDI client and download all the corporate secrets to them. It's happened in the past. So you can actually set policies to prevent this while allowing other things like scanners or printers to be attached to them. The screenshot here is from a LG 24CK monitor. It's kind of a cool thing. It's an all-in-one that has the computer in the monitor itself. So you just have a single device that you have to deal with. But it had 2 USB 3 devices, 4 USB 2 devices. It had a DP display port output, so you can hook up your second monitor to it. And it even had an HDMI port, so if you did have a local system, you could use it for that as well. This particular device was designed for the medical field, and it has wireless network connectivity. It has an RJ45 port as well, but it has an SFP port on it, and this allows fiber connectivity to it. So if you're in a device that uses like a CAT scan or an X-ray machine that kicks out a lot of EMF, you can use fiber channel to use it for the networking in it. So it's kind of a neat little unit. One of the most interesting and exciting things that I saw over the last year and a half is that we're seeing power users using VDI or HDI systems. In the early days, VDI were mostly task workers who used 1, maybe 2 applications. But with this great migration that took place over the last year and a half, we're seeing a lot more people, engineers, creative types, people who use CAD, CAM, CATIA, SolidWorks, AutoCAD, Nastran, media and entertainment folks that are using video editing software that create the movies that we all enjoy. We enjoyed them probably more than we should have in the last year and a half. Use remote desktops. With the advancements in VDI over the past year, GPU-enabled virtual desktops are now viable. Sometimes you can have multiple desktops sharing one GPU. Other times you can have a single GPU tied to a virtual desktop. It's really neat, the stuff that we're using, and people are starting to use this in the real world. In this slide, I used a connection where the virtual desktop located in the Midwest brought up a CAD model of an engine that was running on this virtual desktop, and I was able to rotate it, slice it in real time without any pause or disruptions. And I was actually kind of surprised on the VDI client how few resources it used. The CPU usage was, 3, 5, 10%, reaching up to even 23%, and even though the network reached 24 megabits per second. All right. But it wasn't just engineers that were using it. We're also seeing the creative types. To get an idea how well video would handle this, I brought up a high-resolution video and played it. It was the virtual desktop was a GPU-enabled desktop as a service desktop, and then I ran this high-definition video onto it. And this video looked great, even though it was being streamed. The CPU on the client reached 54% utilization, and 14 megabit of data was being transferred. And the entire time, the audio and video played flawlessly. When I reached out to my friends, a lot of them do work with M&E, and they say, yeah, we really are doing video editing with virtual desktops. Another thing that I didn't think of, but an SE told me about using geographical information systems, GIS, not real familiar with them, but they do use a lot of data. They do a lot of manipulation. So to get a feel for this, I actually used Google Earth on a remote desktop. This one didn't. Did this one have a GPU? I don't think this one had a GPU, but I was still able to rotate and manipulate the Earth in real time, and the experience was just like I'd seen running the applications on local machines. In fact, in all these cases, the experience was real similar to what I had on local machines. And then another case that I saw involved data locality. In one case, a company, it was a video editing company, they figured they'd get around the great migration is they actually just sent the workstations. These were $10,000, $20,000 workstations. They just sent them home with the user. And let them run from home. This caused some really interesting issues. One was these workstations were kind of loud, and they put out a lot of heat, and it made it uncomfortable for people to be in the same room as the workstation, whereas in the office they had better cooling. They were designed for it. But another issue they had is data locality. When you do video editing, you need hundreds of large video files. But these files are stored in the data center. They don't really want all that data out there. They want to decide when the movie's released rather than someone who hacks into a system and releases it. So they're very peculiar about their storage. And at first they tried setting up a VPN between the two and just doing it in real time. That didn't work out. So the next thing they did is, well, we'll just ship portions of file overnight to the workers. Well, first they tried to ship the files real time. but that just clobbered the network, and people who had their spouse working from home, their kids working from home, it was just, killing the network. And so they said, we'll do it at night. They tried doing it at night, but that caused problems as well, because people would edit files. They wouldn't check them back out. They wouldn't check them out. And people said they lost literally days worth of work because of just trying to keep the files in sync. So what they did is they moved the workstations back into the data center and used VDI to access they use HDI to access the workstations remotely, and they had great response from that. Another thing that this SE mentioned was a collaboration. These creative types, when they were in the office, they would gather their buddies around, do I need the hair on the dinosaur or the troll to look this way? And so they were able to, when they were in the office, they were able to gather people around and take a look at it. It was trivial to do that. However, they found that working remotely, everyone's in a different part of the city or even in the country, it became kind of an issue. But once they implemented the remote work, the remote desktop, is a lot of the VDI solutions allow remote collaboration, so everyone has the access to the keyboard, the video, and the monitor, and they're all looking at the same screen at the same time, and you can allow them to take over and change things as needed. So that was just kind of an interesting side effect of using virtual desktops. I found that kind of interesting. One of the big challenges, ugly support and monitoring these systems, because you have a lot more components in VDI. You have the edge device that people are using. You have the virtual desktop. Good news is that working from the workplace simplifies we have tools out there that simplifies it. I'm showing you a screenshot of two different things here. The back one is the iGel, and that's a VDI software, and with it you can enable it to shadow the entire device screen. So that's the entire device, just not the virtual desktops. Or the other screenshot here allows you just to monitor and shadow the virtual desktop itself. Neat thing about this software is you have the option to alert the user when you are monitoring them, and you can give them the option to say, yes, go ahead and monitor my screen, see what I'm seeing, which makes it so much easier when you're trying to diagnose a problem. But we do need to have those things in place that alert people when you are looking over their shoulders, privacy reasons. Again, in Europe with their GDPR, you do need to let people know that. So that is an option that we have. The one thing that there are two things that just about everyone mentioned, and one is that last 50 feet, the ugly last 50 feet. What I'm talking about, the last 50 feet, is from the device that you're trying to access your remote desktop from to your Wi-Fi router, right? I heard story after story about people complaining that they're just not having a good user experience. And finally, what they said is, can you take your physical device, your endpoint device, and move it closer to your Wi-Fi router? And problems magically disappeared. And we kind of caught on to this and as an industry, and so now we have things in place that actually measure the Wi-Fi signal strength from the endpoint device to the Wi-Fi router. And people that I talked to said this is just a lifesaver for them. Now that we can see that their signal strength's only 40%, move a little bit closer to your device, and a lot of problems go away. So that's one of the things I consistently heard people mention, is just that last 50 feet was killing them. The other thing was connectivity. When we first had all these users trying to connect into the data center main office, we tried to use VPNs with cable routers, and we just swamped the data center. We just weren't set up for all of our workers to use VPN to do the data center, so we had to get more physical VPNs. Sometimes we had virtual VPNs and did it. And part of that problem goes away is when you use a VDI solution, you don't need a VPN because the security stuff is usually built into the VDI solution itself. But another interesting thing that was mentioned was SD-WAN, and we now have these little mini SD-WAN devices. And so what an SD-WAN device does, it allows you to use multiple media to reach the main office. So if you have a high-value worker that absolutely positively needs to connect to the home office, you can set them up with broadband, with 5G, with LTE, with MPLS, and the SD-WAN router will, if your broadband goes down, then it'll use one of the other medias. It'll use 5G to reach the main office. So we saw these mini SD-WAN devices, and they're expensive, but if you have a high-value employee that absolutely needs to access the data center, they work out well. So what are people using to connect to the remote workforce? You can use a native client, which just is a VDI client, allows you to attach to your remote desktop. Even if it's a Windows virtual desktop, you can still run the native client on your Mac, your Windows machine, your Linux machine, what have you, or web browsers. Web browsers are becoming extremely popular. I've used them, and the experience you get with the web browser is really quite remarkable. It's really not a second-level experience as opposed to using one of the other VDI clients. We have a thick client. People were out there repurposing PCs, putting VDI software on that. It's an OS it installs as an OS, these VDI clients on thick clients. We also have thin clients that come pre-installed with the VDI software. They come in various form factors. You have mobile devices. You have those little inexpensive ones that are based on ARM processors. They're under $100. If you have a task workers, those things work out great. They support dual monitors. For some of the people that needed more monitors, high-res monitors, they make very powerful thin clients now, VDI thin clients now, that support 6 monitors. So you have a wide variety of those. You also have zero clients, and the VDI connectivity software is kind of baked into the firmware. They tend to be very secure. So those were another options that people were using. But you can also use mobile devices, especially with web browsers that connect to your virtual desktop to connect to them. Management, monitoring, again, a little bit more difficult in a remote environment. So things you want to look for in monitoring and management software is you want it to be, holistic. Take a look at everything from the virtual desktop, the infrastructure it runs on, even monitor the endpoint device, the client, the VDI client. You want real-time monitoring, and real-time means different things to different people. Real-time monitoring for some companies, some monitoring software is 3 seconds. For other companies, real-time means 10 to 15 minutes. So if you are looking at these solutions, find out what real-time monitoring means to them. Historical information, some monitoring solutions allow you to keep, a year's worth of data, and that's real interesting to see trending, things like that. And others even have automation where you can use triggers for self-healing and self-management. Features to look for in a VDI platform is, I think today you really want something that's infrastructure agnostic, something that does hybrid. It does on-premise as well as clouds. you want something that can deliver desktops as well as applications. Like I said, we're becoming more and more application-centric rather than desktop-centric users. You want something that can use a wide variety of endpoint devices, and also you really need to be aware of your Active Directory or your identity manager agnostic. Make sure that it works with what you have. So guys, we covered a lot of ground here, and the really good news is, according to a Price Waterhouse survey, the really good news is that corporations are willing to pony up the money to make this work. I think between the technology that we have and the desire from remote workers to continue to work remotely, companies realize this, and they are going to spend money to make it happen. So with that, the good, I mean, we survived the last year and a half. I think everyone should applaud themselves. I don't know how we did it. We proved that we can have a remote workforce. And let's go ahead and up some Q&A there.
Okay, thank you, Tom. First, so let me get this straight. Are you saying that on-site ping pong won't be enough to compensate employees for 2-hour daily commutes?
You know, I've worked at some locations that have fantastic cafeterias, but on the whole, I'd rather sit at home and eat my peanut butter and jelly sandwich than go into those offices. I really would, yeah.
Okay, we do have quite a few questions. Oh, good Lord, we don't have as much time as I thought we had for me to fool around. So let's just start with what application is used to test the last 50 feet signal strength?
Okay. Disclaimer, I do work with ControlUp, and that was ControlUp's monitoring software, but there are other people out there that do it, but that screenshot was from ControlUp. So, yep. And you know, that's great that someone asked, because that is something that is so important to people now.
Okay. This is a little bit of a long one. Let me be sure I get this right. VDI client using decent PCs, all unified comms, etc., running locally, worked perfectly. So you were discussing an extremely thin client with these models, question mark. Can VDI/DASS work well and in combo with a decent remote worker PC? Let's stop with this one.
Yeah, let me. Okay, so I think what VDI clients using decent team. Okay, I think what the person was saying is that, yeah, unified comms works with a PC running it locally, and I think he was asking, so even if you have a low price thin client, can you still do that MMR? And yes, absolutely. The one that I tested was it was a sub $200 VDI client, worked great. It also works if you're using a native client, a VDI native client. It works with that as well. So the answer is yes. You can work it with a low price client.
Okay. This one is, I worked in a reservoir engineering consultant company. The one thing we had problems with was rotating 3D big reservoir models. We tried it with Citrix and virtual environment. What is the appropriate solution for a problem like this?
Yeah, so, yeah, I don't know if I can drop names here, but I think maybe on the back end you needed more power, and you can monitor that and see if your CPU usage on your back end was being maxed out. I used it with a GPU-enabled virtual desktop, worked great. So,
okay,
yes,
so
yes,
this is actually more of a... Okay, good. Yeah, and look, as far as I'm concerned, drop as many names as you want.
Okay.
So these are more comments, I think, than questions. I am surprised that the average commute time, I'm sure they mean, is only 40 minutes. I would think it was that was one way. Well, it sure is around here in Silicon Valley, and we even have super commuters that have 2 hours one way. So,
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Comment well taken. Yeah.
Okay, here's another one. Some managers were asking to have video on in the beginning, but now it is not a requirement. I think management is now accepting that we do not work. Pardon me, that we have Freudian slip there, that we do work when we are working from home. Is that what you found too, Tom?
Yeah, and there was another survey that actually monitored that and found that, yes, people are as productive working from home as they were from the office. And I totally understand from a management point of view that, why they'd be concerned. But surveys have shown, managers have seen that people are as productive. So, yep, good point.
Okay, what do you think of Windows 365? How would users connect to internal resources? Would they use a VPN?
So Windows 365, that was announced last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, and that is a virtual desktop on the same lines as Office 365. And I haven't seen enough information about it to really get a good feel for it. Like I said, it just got announced, but with Microsoft, it is something that will have to be reckoned with. And there is another question here I want to pop off. Is there a PCOIP solution? Right. Absolutely. Horizon works with PCOIP. AWS Workstation works with PCOIP. You can have 0 clients that have PCOIP built into it. So PCOIP is one of the remote protocols. It's very efficient. It does the encryption. It does the compression very efficiently. So yes, there are a lot of PCOIP solutions out there. Horizon, AWS, a few others.
Awesome. Okay, let's see here. We're kind of running out of time here. You got the PCOIP. Okay. Boy, lots of thank yous. That's great. How about this one? How hard is it to add a new user to a VDI environment?
Real easy. Actually, setting up a on-premise VDI solution is I can do it in an hour. Of course, I've done it for the past 15 years, but new users, they can set up an on-premise in a day, 2 days, a lot of training out there for it. DAS are even simpler in most cases. You just add them in there. Add a new user. You just put them in the Active Directory. A new virtual desktop will be spun up as needed.
Okay.
I do see someone.
Sure,
contact info. Sure, you can reach.
Yeah, there's a lot of requests for contact info. Yeah.
Yep. LinkedIn. Tom Fenton. You can find me there. Or you can @vdoppler is my Twitter. Is that right? Twitter name. You can reach me that way as well.
Got to thank you for that one. Look, I think we're out of time here. What a great session. Thank you so much. And thank you for your expertise, Tom, and thank you to our sponsor, Nutanix, for making it possible. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our second session of the day, Next Generation Approaches to End-User Computing in 2020, with John O'Neill, the Chief Technologist for AWS Solutions, and it will be hosted by my colleague, Leif Lowe. Now would be a good time to check out those resources on your console provided by Nutanix. And remember, during today's third session, we will be giving away a GoPro Hero 9, so stay tuned. Be back in a few.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome back to our Future of Desktop Infrastructure Virtual Summit. My name is Leif Lowe, and I'll be your moderator for this second session today in our Virtual Summit. This session is entitled Next Generation Approaches to End-User Computing in 2021. And again, this entire session is being sponsored by Nutanix. Well, as the pandemic began to grip the world in early 2020, it certainly kicked off a forced march to remote work. This rapid shift placed a huge burden on technologies, and for the most part, the technology proved to be up to the task. So this has also led to a rapid advance of digital transformation efforts at companies of all sizes. It was kind of an inadvertent proving ground for both the technology and the processes that support that technology. Well, as the world begins to emerge from the pandemic, these technologies and processes will take on a new level of importance. Over the last year and a half or so, we've all realized collectively what works, what doesn't, what we could do better, and what sort of direction we want to take. But during this second session today, we'll examine some of the new next-gen approaches to supporting this new hybrid workforce. Our featured speaker for this session is John O'Neill, Sr. John is the Chief Technologist for AWS Solutions. And during his more than 20 years in IT, John has worked as a consultant, architect, executive speaker, and author. So we're in good hands. He has been involved in many multinational networking, messaging, and communications projects. He's authored material for Thomson Reuters Aspetor books and exec blueprints. And he also develops courseware for Pluralsight. John's a frequent speaker at IT events such as TechMentor, Cloud and Virtualization, Live 360, the NEOSA CIO Summit, and the Northeast Ohio Technology Summit. He's been honored as a multi-year Microsoft MVP and has received NEOSA's CIO of the Year award. And I always like to mention that he is also a PADI-certified IDC staff scuba diving instructor. Glad to have you back, John.
Hey, Clay. Great to be here.
Indeed, indeed. All right, now before John and I get rolling into this second session, I just want to remind those of you of a few housekeeping items. If you would like to submit a question at any time, which we'd certainly encourage you to do, and I was thrilled to see there were so many questions after the first session, you can post your questions using the question field to the left of the slide window. Type your question in there and hit submit, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the session. Also want to remind you that this entire summit is indeed being recorded, so you'll be able to go over and review this again, or even pass it along to share with a colleague. All right, John, let's start and begin our exploration of how organizations can best prepare for and embrace this next generation of end-user computing. Time to dive in, as we like to say. All right,
I love to dive.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, to kick things off at a high level, in your opinion, what do you feel has worked best during this surge of remote work? And what do you think we could have done better? What could we improve on?
Well, so kind of focusing in, because it's definitely a broad question, right?
I realize it's a 30,000-foot view question.
Yeah, we could cover operational aspects. We could cover, technological, and that's kind of where I'll focus my response is in the technological. Things that worked well and in the shift that occurred because of the pandemic were our connectivity, right? So, I'm not speaking about the connectivity challenges that, a lot of educational institutions had and things like that with students not having connectivity or whatever. I'm talking about from organizational standpoints. Most of the people that had to go to a remote work environment, connectivity didn't pose a problem for them. Whether they relied on, 4G or 5G technologies, whether they relied on cable-based internet or fiber-based internet, they had the bandwidth necessary to connect in and complete their jobs. The other things that worked well were our identity management systems. So the ability to authenticate, authorize, and account for what users are doing, whether they be remotely or on-prem. And that sort of thing. Where I think we definitely have room for improvement is I think some organizations spent a lot of energy and time trying to force fit the remote work look into the on-prem look. So, they tried to force fit it using the same devices, using the same methodology. And to give a specific example of where that would be a problem, if, we put a thick client on the other end, we connect them by a VPN, but we allow them to operate the same where they're transferring, a lot of files onto servers that are on-prem and different things. that's a lot of bandwidth constraints. So even though connectivity wasn't a problem, we still have, bandwidth constraints. You can have great connectivity, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to congest it or overuse it. And I think that happened a lot where people were trying to force, hey, I'm just going to do it the exact same way I do it from the office, but from my home. And then you throw in the fact that there were outside influences on that. For instance, me, I have 5 kids. So I have kids doing remote learning and everything else from home. And so I have these challenges of, if we look at just the technical, again, congesting that bandwidth. I also have the challenges of separating space and providing isolation. We had to address the fact that we needed new ways to communicate. So whether that be a mic and a soft phone kind of thing, or a video conferencing type thing, or even connecting a hardwired VoIP phone from the desk across that VPN, those things took place. But I think that we definitely could have improved, and now hindsight being 2020, we definitely will improve when we have remote work scenarios, looking at it for what it is, which is a unique need and configuration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're talking about like putting a thick line onto a strong connection. It kind of brings up the whole, a chain's only as strong as its weakest link, or only as fast as its fastest link, as it may be.
That's a perfect analogy,
Yeah, that's kind of what it makes me think of. Yeah, it does seem like overall things worked fairly well, I would say. I mean, I'm thankful, just personally, I'm thankful to say that I was already working from home, so it really wasn't as much of a shift for me, but certainly was for everyone else. All right, moving right along. Certainly, I mean, everything's virtual these days. Virtual meetings, virtual summits, like we're doing right now. How critical do you think virtual technologies will continue to be as we move ahead?
Well, I certainly think that as a generalization, we certainly aren't stepping back, right? We've rung a bell, and you can't unring that bell. And what that bell is the announcement that virtual technologies provide strategic capability to organizations, whether they be companies, whether they be non-for-profits, educational. There's still some holdouts that want to fight against that, but by and large, that's the consensus, is that, hey, like in the previous session, a lot of discussion was given on VDI, and VDI isn't new. It's been around for quite a while. It never gained traction, but the pandemic basically threw a supercharged engine and a big set of tires and watched that thing peel out.
Yep.
So, and now that that's happened, and companies have realized that they can leverage VDI in ways that they weren't thinking of before. 5 years ago, the discussion of VDI was all about desktop replacement. And now it's about not just that, but granting capabilities in environments where a conventional deployment don't work.
Yeah.
For instance, one of the things that I've used to great success through the pandemic is cloud-based VDI. So like WVD, so Microsoft Windows Virtual Desktop, hosted up in Azure. That is cloud-based VDI, but it's a great option for addressing certain challenges. For instance, I'll give you a quick scenario. Company had employees that were either stuck in or had to go back to foreign countries. And the specific example in this case would be China. And I think you and I have talked about this before in the past in this case. Well, China is very specific about what types of encryption technologies they'll allow VPN-wise. And I mean, basically it amounts to you can only use ones that they can monitor or that sort of thing. So, the VPN client typically used by this customer wouldn't work across those networks. But by deploying a WVD desktop into the cloud, VPN connecting that back into their data source at the company headquarters, we were able to give them the ability to continue working while in a different country with quite good performance, and still all the security and the identity management and those kind of things we needed in place. So that virtualization technology really empowered getting those workers, because it wasn't just about shifting workers from on-prem to remote. Remember, there was a good number of workers that were stranded, if you will, based on travel restrictions.
So truly.
So they didn't plan to be remote, but they really had no choice. And some of those, if you look at some of those, they still exist to this day. And then we've learned a lot of things from that, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit later with terms of, now we have a new challenge ahead of us, and that is convincing people to come back to the office.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't want to. For convenience or lingering concern of the pandemic and whatnot.
Right. Work-life balance, all those kind of things, and so many companies will tote that line. Like Apple has a pretty well-publicized hard line on that with people coming back, and there's some pretty good published data about that. There's a lot of workers unhappy about that, to the point of resigning or moving on, that kind of thing. But you also have other organizations that are willing to say, hey, maybe we're never going to go back to the way we were. Maybe we need to look at this and look at positions within our organization and determine which ones can be served just as well from a remote environment to a non-remote environment. And virtualization is a critical link in that chain of making that, from a technological standpoint, a reality.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, that certainly segues nicely into the next question. As we look ahead, we've seen what works and what we need to focus more on. Would you see organizations placing a heavier reliance now on cloud platforms and cloud-based services?
Absolutely. The shift to the cloud has been ongoing pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
But what you see, again, this is kind of like that boost button for anybody else that plays video games, right? You have the racing games. There always seems to be a turbo or a boost function in there. And there's a lot of things related to what we did during the pandemic that I can equate quite easily to that concept of somebody hit the boost button. And the adoption or migration to the cloud, however you want to look at it, definitely seemed to get a kick in the pants when the pandemic hit and raged on, and it's still ongoing. And there's numerous reasons for that. One is, that's quite easily on the top of my head, is the cloud and cloud providers are, without additional technologies and that sort of thing, easily connectable from anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have to have specific locations. We don't have to have specific circuits, those sorts of things. The fact of the matter is like that example I gave before, where you can have somebody in a place that they can't even run your VPN software, able to connect into resources if they're hosted properly in the cloud and configured and that sort of thing. So that made a shift. You also have the advanced security that's provided and has evolved through the cloud during the same time that we've been going through this remote work shift and everything else. Let's face it, the amount of state-sponsored malware is through the roof over the past year. And so everybody's working remotely. We have to go under this principle of zero zero trust, and least privilege. And, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I know we have a slide here on security, but those things, yes, we can address them on premise, but when our workforce is distributed in remote and in uncontrolled environments, the way we address it has to be agile and evolving, and the cloud is the best place for that. By far, the cloud provides us with better capability that is more robust and more agile than anything that we can deploy in our on-premise data center.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that also segues nicely to the next question. I mean, as we're talking about a return to work, return to the office, I mean, there'll be certainly a hybrid setup, moving ahead. There'll be some people working in the office, some people working remotely, and as more companies use more virtual and cloud-based technologies, how will they best integrate those with their kind of remaining on-premises systems?
Yeah, and this is something that actually I consult on quite a bit, because
I bet.
Here's the deal in a nutshell, is that most organizations, it is absolutely unreasonable to consider a successful greenfield deployment to the cloud, where we basically eliminate on-prem and shift entirely to the cloud.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
That is only really an option in a very small set of scenarios. By and far, most organizations are going to need a hybrid infrastructure, and they're going to need that for quite some time. In fact, when I sit down with CIOs and CEOs and COOs and talk about, what their strategy should be IT related, both in the near term and then in the midterm, which is a couple years out, and then in the long term, which would be, 5 to 7 years, we're not even to the point where we can say, hey, we'll be out of a hybrid mode in that long-term scenario, okay? Because there's just too much going on inside these on-premise data centers that has been built up over decades that it makes sense, financial or other resource-wise, to just unwind that in a hurry. They're going to have ERP systems that are still on-prem. And if they shift their ERP system to the cloud, which will be a multi-year project for many, even when that's done, they'll still have integrations from that ERP into their manufacturing or their distribution or other systems that by their very nature have to be on-prem, right?
Yeah.
For instance, let's look at manufacturing. I've spent a great deal of my career in the manufacturing space, and by definition, that means you're producing things in a building. There is no possible way.
Yep.
Yeah, there's no possible way to disconnect all of your IT systems from that and have it still be as productive as your competitors. So there's always going to be that hybrid for those scenarios. And I hate to use the terms always or never, but that's one that I don't see how you can. It would be like, trying to have all your trucks in one location and your product in another location, and say, hey, we're never going to connect the two. Well, then how are you going to move the product?
Yeah. There's certain physical realities that do exist.
Exactly. And so we're going to have to continue to use things like Azure AD Connect so that we can house and use our identity management system, in that case Active Directory, both on-premise and in the cloud, okay? And the thing is the hybrid gives us the best of both worlds. So we get, we get the ability to onboard users even if, we have a connectivity issue or something like that. And we get the ability to do self-service password reset from anywhere with an internet connection. There's a lot of good that comes out of hybrid environments in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
There is, the downside to that is there's a much heavier administrative load when you have a hybrid environment, because now you have to maintain skill sets that are tuned towards the on-prem scenarios, and you have to maintain skill sets that are tuned to cloud scenarios. And in many organizations, the same people are getting tasked with both.
With both, yeah. Yeah, it expands the realm of the IT person, for sure. For sure. All right, we talked a little bit about some security concerns, and we certainly hear troubling stories about malware and cyber attacks in the news every night. But as we move to this kind of hybrid virtual and physical and mobile world, are there any sort of new or evolving security concerns, or it's just more of the same?
Well, it's a turbo button version of the same, right?
Another boost button.
Yes. So it's absolutely another boost button. You know, it's just like if you go way back into the 80s and the advent of the first viruses or whatever, we talked about viruses. The term malware really didn't exist then, right? And then threat actors and bad actors, you know, learned how to leverage programs, software, to again allow them to take advantage of other people's work and, you know, do all the bad things they do with it, whether it simply be, you know, pop-up ads or whatever. So we evolved it into terms like adware and spyware, and, you know, eventually we just all started calling it malware. Anything that's malicious, that does something we don't want it to do, falls into that category. The problem is, for us today, that within the past couple years, and really it goes back a little bit further than that, but let's talk about the most recent, state-sponsored, where governments are funding malware, has really become the new norm and the new concern for us in IT. And, you know, that's a whole different ballgame. These aren't just small groups of people that are devoting the resources to write a program or to distribute a program or whatever to try and, you know, harvest credit card numbers to sell on the dark web or do those kind of things. These are nations, governments, with the resources of governments dedicated towards disruption and dismay and chaos, you know.
Targeted attacks.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, we've worried for decades about our financial networks, right? And so we put a lot of safety in there as far as IT goes to protect our financial networks and things like that. But the pandemic has taught us a lot about that isn't the only way we're vulnerable in terms of destroying our economy or doing those kind of things. And so let me go into that a little bit, right? We all know about the shortage of PPE. We couldn't produce enough personal protective equipment for our doctors and our nurses and first responders, so that these people were literally at physical risk just trying to help others or just do their jobs, right? And that was one aspect of our manufacturing capability that was exposed. Now, I want everyone to imagine for a moment, what happens if we can, talk about Stuxnet, which is very old, but it's a great example. You take a piece of malware that targets a PLC or controller that is used by 80% of the manufacturers in the U.S., and you infect it with malware and you disrupt them, right? What does that do? Now your groceries aren't being produced, your clothing, your medical equipment, your pharmaceuticals, all that stuff. And now you don't want to disrupt it on the manufacturing side. Let's look at distribution. Manufacturing could be fine and we could produce it all day long, but if trucks aren't moving and trains aren't moving and ships aren't moving, I mean, this is still going on in the port of Long Beach. You know, pull up one of the online maps that show you the cargo ships that are waiting to be unloaded and how long they've been out there. You know, you could theoretically end up with hospitals waiting on supplies that they don't get simply because distribution has been disrupted. So it you know, I'm not trying to scare anybody or doom and gloom, but I'm just trying to say that the security threats that we have to protect our organizations from are much broader and deeper and more powerful than they've ever been. So we have to think outside the box. And we have to go forward with principles like zero trust, where instead of taking the position of if we are breached, we assume everything is breached.
Yeah,
right. And so we implement principles that protect our systems in such a way that if this is breached, meaning we assume it's breached, it can't damage anything else, or it damages the minimal amount possible. And then we also
across the whole enterprise.
You got it. And we use things like principles of least privilege. I mean, that's a very old concept, but a lot of people haven't really given it much other than lip service. Well, today that's a real thing we have to do. And what about our IT admins that are working remote? The possibility of their elevated credentials being exposed can really, it goes up because they're working remotely. So we want to implement
wide open.
Yeah, so we want to implement technologies like just enough administration or JITJIA, just in time, just enough administration, and those kind of things. Where we're doing our tasks, we're empowered to do those tasks, but we're doing them in such a way where we elevate only to the level necessary, and we stay there only as long as necessary, right? And then we come back down in terms of our rights within the system and access and that kind of thing. So, this is one I've spent more time talking about than we probably should have. But security is a big piece if we're gonna continue on our march forward with remote computing and everything else, which I believe we are. Everyone has to take security not only seriously, but just integrate it as part of their job and part of their responsibility.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, you talked a little bit about the security is certainly everyone's job. We talked a little bit earlier about kind of the evolving role of the IT person, having to support on-premises and remote. What other sort of business processes are there, and how should they evolve to best support and complement these sort of hybrid environments?
So, and this goes against a lot of IT people's first instinct, which is that, the technology allows everyone to be just as productive remotely as on-prem, and that isn't true. There is something to be said for the impromptu collaboration that occurs around the water cooler kind of thing. And we try to, pretend that we can duplicate those things with Zoom and Teams and all that stuff. But the reality is it's not the same, right? A picture may be 1,000 words, a video might be 10,000 words, but in person is 100,000. It's just it's different. I mean, it's why Steve Jobs was so particular about building the ring at Apple Park. He wanted people to intersect with one another randomly, because during those random intersections, valuable things can happen. And businesses have to create a environment, and this isn't just a physical environment, it's an environment of business process and culture where they find a way to encourage that level of integration. And, the water cooler doesn't have to be at corporate headquarters. I can think of all sorts of ways that you can still establish face-to-face time. For instance, once the pandemic has settled and we're no longer worried about, getting sick, but we still want to work remote because it's a better work-life balance. It's a better, opportunity for me to get things done because my the tasks I need to complete aren't necessarily linear that occur from 9 to 5. They may, just need to spend a couple hours in the morning, a couple hours in the afternoon, a couple hours in the evening kind of environment. Whatever the reason is that makes remote work better, you can still have, impromptu company meetups.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go out to dinner, meet at a ball game, right? Do an escape room, whatever. Do these exercises, and they need to be sponsored by the organization, by the leadership, so that our teams don't disconnect and see everybody as a flat two-dimensional screen anymore.
Right. Yeah, humans are certainly social creatures, both professionally and personally. Absolutely.
Yeah, right. And if business processes don't evolve to keep those connections strong, they will suffer. The organizations will suffer for it, and the teams will suffer for it.
Yep.
So they have to evolve, and you have to. You've got some just general administrative challenges that you have to deal with, right? Like there will be some people that will thrive and be just as productive remotely working, and then there will be those that are tempted to, go spend a lot of their time playing with the dogs or, whatever. And so organizations have to develop the processes and implement the systems to where they can create very, very specific dictated performance measures that they can, that employees can use to, track their progress against expectations, but also that management can use to understand that, yes, teammates are
actually working.
Yeah. Because, and I mean, that's if we go back a generation to those leaders, if they're in their mindset, many of them, if you weren't present, if they couldn't see you, you weren't working.
Yeah.
And that isn't the case as a majority. I don't believe that's the case. But the problem is, like anything, stereotypes don't become stereotypes without reason.
Yeah, exactly.
So, there are outliers that are doing that, and unfortunately, the majority. There's a saying my dad used to say that I can't say on here, but the gist of it was that the rules for the rest of us are made by the minority that chooses to do something they're not supposed to.
Yeah. Yep. I know what you mean by that. All right. Well, looking at other ways the forced march to remote work has affected companies. I mean, a lot of companies were already, maybe their move to the cloud or their digital transformation was a slow burn. And, this pandemic and remote work threw a fuel on that fire. So if a company has already got somewhat of a cloud presence and is looking to significantly expand their cloud footprint, what are some of the more important considerations they should think of?
So the first one I'm going to start with is security.
Yep.
They must ensure that they are going wide and deep on their security systems. So this isn't just, on-prem or server-based virus protection. This is things like privileged identity management and advanced threat protection, IDS, IPS, all those kind of things, and it needs to be extended into the cloud. It needs to cover your cloud resources. I'm a huge fan of the Microsoft Defender product suite, and I don't mean just the client thing. They've renamed the ATP products now under that Microsoft Defender line. So you have, Microsoft Defender 365 and Microsoft Defender ATP and all these different things. But they are all, born in the cloud and extend on-prem. And so whatever solution you use, that's the concept you want. You want it to basically protect you wherever you are. And that's back to the zero trust thing. We want to protect our endpoints, our users, our data wherever it may exist. We're no longer going to think about it as just inside our fixed network perimeter. We're going to think about it wherever it is, we're going to protect it. And so that security is a big one. And then, another one is that organizations that may have been on that slow march or that slow burn, they might not or probably haven't gotten to the point of really considering the need for multi-cloud, right, where they have more than one provider or they're distributed across different providers because different providers do certain things better than other providers, that sort of thing. As they expand their cloud footprint to, adapt and remain competitive, that multi-cloud discussion is probably something better done sooner rather than later.
Yep.
And, another thing is now I think a lot of people have partially implemented cloud solutions or resources. I do a lot of consulting on this where I go in and they're like, oh, we've been working on moving to the cloud forever and we've got this and we got that. And I go in and I start looking around and I see that, let's take something we're talking about, endpoint management or whatnot. And I look in and I go, well, when I look on your on-premise, you have 100 endpoints, but when I look in your endpoint management solution in the cloud, you have 20. Why is that?
Yep.
Right? And, we started, but we didn't finish. And then, you can take that same scenario and extend it to, you see that partially done there, and then you look elsewhere and you see that, hey, they're only partially deployed in terms of the security probes to their domain controllers and stuff, and there's a lot of unfinished business. So that's another thing that an organization needs to do. That will get worse if you just continue expanding your cloud use without going back and addressing it. So one of the big things that I recommend to organizations right now is do an assessment of what your current implementation of the cloud looks like and what percentage complete is it compared with what your marker is for complete.
Yeah.
Because if you find gaps, the longer you leave gaps, the more things you'll end up with gaps in.
Yeah. And then the easier it'll be to get through those gaps from a security perspective.
You got it.
Yeah. That's good advice. I like that. All right. Excellent. Well, looking at not that we've been doom and gloom, but, certainly like addressing the concerns of security and, growing in the right direction and whatnot. But as we kind of move out of the pandemic and into whatever this next wave looks like, this hybrid scenario, what sort of opportunities do you think might open up for business as we continue to work with more virtual and cloud-based technologies and services?
So, historical precedent-wise, if we look at things like the Industrial Revolution or things like that, a lot of winning a bid or that sort of thing dealt with your ability to deliver something or produce something. So from a manufacturing standpoint, that could be a widget. It might be writing a book. It might be whatever. But in the modern economy, particularly post-pandemic, it's about value add and instant gratification. And let me explain that. So value add, you may produce a widget. Well, there's 50 other people that can produce a widget. So what's going to make a customer pick you, right? Well, it's going to be that value add. It's going to be what differentiates you. And that thing that differentiates you could very well be something that has nothing to do with your manufacturing skill. If you're a 100-year-old company that's been manufacturing widgets for 100 years, you should be pretty good at it by now. And obviously you are because you've survived 100 years. But what do you do that goes above and beyond that? Maybe it's packaging. Maybe you become really good at producing, packaging that markets the product better for the customer that's buying it for you. Maybe it's, your ability to incorporate parts of the widget that are produced by other manufacturers, have them shipped into your organization and assemble them so that the customer is delivered a finished product. It could be any number of things, but it's value add. And then the second part, which is really important for us IT folks, is that instant gratification. Years ago, my father was a quality control engineer. So he was a chemical engineer by education, but he spent his career in quality control for the automotive industry and manufacturing industries. And, in his day and age, they'd get a request for quote, and it would go around, and maybe, the sales department wanted some information from him, and they'd type a memo, and they'd put it in his mailbox, and the next morning he'd read it, and he'd type a response, and he'd put it in their mail slot, and they'd read it the next morning, right? And it's 2 weeks before they respond to the customer, and the customer just expected that. That was no big deal. Yeah. That doesn't exist today. Today, it's often, the fastest horse in the race wins. And as dumb as that sounds, it's true, right? It's the company that has the communication and the collaboration system that when a opportunity comes in is able to seize it, analyze it, prepare a response, and ultimately respond to it. Okay? And it's the same concept behind, if we even look at our security systems. The best security systems are those that, react the fastest to a threat, that analyze it the fastest using the best algorithms, that produce the best potential set of actions, whether it be quarantine or deletion or whatever, right? And then implement those. And we want those threat detection systems, if you will, to be super fast, because the longer they take, the more likely it is it'll be too late by the time they respond. Same kind of deal in modern businesses is we need our IT systems to support that rapid instant gratification expected by our partners to be able to, win out over the competition.
Yep.
And so it will fall on IT, on all of us, to not only create those systems, but implement them, keep them working, keep the data flowing. Because, that's a perfect example of that is you get ransomware. I spend a lot of my life on, systems designed to obviously prevent, but then also rapidly remediate ransomware. Okay, do a lot of consulting on that. And one of the biggest disruptions ransomware has is it locks out an organization's ability to provide that instant gratification to their customers, partners, stakeholders. Hey, you guys have been working on that drawing for the next level widget, and what's the deal? Well, I'm sorry, we lost that in this ransomware attack. We're working to get it back. How patient is your customer going to be? And they may have no choice but to be patient on that. But anybody who doesn't think that they won't remember that and that doesn't damage the relationship is pulling some wool over their own eyes, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
right? Because I don't know about you, but if the doctor I go to is breached and information is exposed, well, perfect example is we've pretty much everyone I know has gotten one of those messages that says, hey, we've been breached, but we don't think your information was compromised. I wish I could ask the audience by show of hands, how many just take that and believe it 100%? Because I bet you there's not, as many hands as companies would hope. Because if you're like me, I'm a trust but verify kind of guy. So I'm like, they say my information wasn't exposed, but one, if they really had good protection systems, it wouldn't have been exposed in the first place. So two, how did they assess that I wasn't included, and was that assessment actually thorough enough to guarantee me that? And at the end of the day, anytime I get one of those, I just assume that my information was included and act accordingly.
Yeah. developing your own best security practices for sure.
Yeah, and it does damage the credibility perception I have of that organization. I mean, there's no better example I can think of SolarWinds. We all consider them, the stalwart of network monitoring and everything else, and I believe that a lot of network engineers' faith in that company and their products has totally been shaken by the Nobelium threat.
Yep.
They may still use SolarWinds, but I bet you they're not deploying patches and, just changing settings based on, clear just belief. They're vetting those things. They're having conversations. They're saying, hey, what should we do here? I mean, I can tell you about a personal implementation I worked on where, they wanted to just install the patch and move forward. And I went with the DoD level guidance on it, which is, they said that they fixed it, but we're going to go with the approach of that a new system has to be deployed. So we deployed SolarWinds using the new build, but it was a from scratch deal.
Yep. Makes sense. All right. Well, we've covered some great stuff here, John. As always, I'd like to give you a chance to see if you have any final thoughts, anything you want to really hammer home or anything you think we might have missed.
Well, I really want to hammer home to all the IT folks out there, that we need to really remind ourselves that, those personal relationships that we build with our customers and our peers and our network are as important as ever. And we don't want to, in this era of remote work, because, it's going to continue. The pandemic could end today and everybody wouldn't just go back to the office tomorrow. The bell can't be unrung.
Yeah. Yep.
But for us particularly, it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that we can do everything as effectively, from behind a computer screen in our home office. And it is just my strong belief that if you let those relationships you've built and cultivated and grown over the years with your network, with your customers, with your peers, your users, whatever, you will suffer for it, and our organizations will suffer for it in the long run. So, do whatever you have to do to keep those in place. And that doesn't mean you have to go back on premise. I'm a big supporter of remote productivity. I truly believe that that actually we can provide competitive advantages in some cases by working remote or having people work remote.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is find other ways to keep those water cooler discussions going and that collaboration going.
Yep. Provide other opportunities for workers to get together and share thoughts and whatnot. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, John. This has been a great discussion, a great overview of how to work within this new hybrid environment. Well, let's see what we have for questions. I know we've had some great questions come in, some great comments too. Thanks for the comments on relationships and networking. Thanks for the security deep dives and whatnot. While we were talking about expanding the cloud footprint and monitoring how a company is growing. I've got a question here that asks: are there scenarios where it would be better to just start a new environment right from scratch?
Well,
is that a little?
That's one of those questions where if I really wanted to hedge, I would say yes.
It depends.
That's right. Yeah. Or it depends. But the reality is that the scenario in which I think that actually would provide more benefit than it cost are small, because you would have to, anytime you do that, you have to ensure that what you've deployed in a greenfield environment is capable of doing 100% of everything that's currently on-prem, if you will, and that your migration doesn't negatively impact any of your stakeholders, so customers, vendors, board of directors, shareholders, whatever. And that's more challenging than it sounds.
Yeah.
So usually it is far easier and more beneficial for organizations and their IT folks to do a hybrid approach, a march. Now, may there come a point, and like I said, I really don't see, us in 5 years talking about how the world is 90% in the cloud with no on-prem resources. I believe there's going to be a bulk of organizations still with on-prem and in the cloud stuff, but there probably will be many more scenarios where companies did reach a point where they said, hey, the things that are remaining on-premise, they're few, they have lower impact, so now we can prepare and make a hard cut to move the rest of them kind of thing. But I will caution my IT peers, because I've been part of a couple of attempts, that it does add a lot of stress onto the IT team to do a rip and replace approach, right?
Yeah.
Because it really is a rip and replace.
Yep, exactly. In a very real sense. All right. We talked about the combination of on-premise and virtual. This is an interesting question here. Is there a need for more R&D investment in creating and developing kind of a secure distributed network of advanced work centers, spread out a little bit, that would support this distributed workforce? We kind of balance the factors of equitable access and reduced commuting times.
Well, and that's an awesome question and a great idea. So, thanks for sending that in, because that's a great thing to discuss too. And it really, one of the big reasons we are all sold on the cloud is its distributed design, right?
Yeah.
There's the internet was designed way back in the 60s as ARPANET to withstand a nuclear attack against any node on the network. And the cloud is pretty much the same thing, right? We could take out whole sections of the cloud, and yet our resources are probably still available to the unaffected regions or that kind of thing. And we don't even have to worry about the infrastructure that makes that happen. It's the cloud provider's problem. Well, so what we're talking about here is taking the on-premise components and allowing them to follow that same model. So, instead of having one big, corporate office building, let's have multiple smaller office spaces and distribute them so that, if there was and we can think about it in terms of catastrophe as far as a power outage or whatever, but we don't have to. We can think about it as equitable distribution of workforce, right? Now we can take advantage of the skill sets that we may not. If we're all located in Little Jefferson, Ohio, there's a fixed number of IT specialists in Jefferson, Ohio. But if I have a space in Jefferson, Ohio, a space in Hartford, Connecticut, a space in, now I get to draw upon the wells that are in each of those locations, and it can provide a distributed advantage. Now, convincing an organization leadership to make the capital investments necessary for that, or the cultural shifts, that's a whole different discussion and a whole different battle, right? But I love the idea. I do agree totally that it matches up with the ability to be agile, right, and responding and acquiring new assets. Because again, if you're distributed, you have the ability to draw from multiple wells. So whatever that need is that comes at you, you can now address from wherever you're able to find the resources to address it. And that's a great benefit. And I also think that this is why places like, WeWork and things like that have really taken off. And I think they'll see a surge as the pandemic wanes and we don't have people wanting to go back to the corporate office kind of thing. I believe that you'll see a surge in those kind of rented office space locations where people can go in and they can use a conference room once a week if they need a conference room, or they can go in and use, connected whiteboards or any of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But they don't need that 40 hours a week, so they
need it all the time.
Yeah. And it's a consumption model, just like a lot of our cloud-based services are, but it's for physical, tangible, on-premise resources.
Yep. Physical office as a service.
I never thought of it that way, but that's a great concept. So, thanks for Michael for pointing that out.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you very much, as always, for your input and explanations, John. Some great stuff we covered here. And thanks also to Nutanix for their sponsorship of this virtual summit. And thanks all of you for listening in today. We hope you're enjoying this online event thus far.